this drawing would be a great way of working on and improving two areas that often are of considerable difficulty for artists, and that is drawing trees in the first instance, and secondly, working with values, lights and darks, particularly when drawing with pencil. Now, this drawing in real time took me 45 minutes to draw. You're watching it at 3 times normal speed. So if you want to see it slower, you can use the cog icon to slow it down to almost drawing speed. And I drew it with a 3B pencil. Normally I would use either a 2B or a 4B, but I've discovered all my 4Bs have become too short to comfortably handle, so I'm using a 3B. Now, this is only the second pencil drawing I've done from the last hundreds of drawings, but I enjoyed the experience so much the other day that I wanted to explore a little more, bringing the drawing technique I've worked on and used with my fine liner, my ink drawing, and to see how it might have changed or informed, developed without me realizing the way I would draw with pencil. Now, you'll notice that I started with outlining the major parts of the canopy, just really with a series of dots. The idea is that I won't be locked into these dots. They're not going to be really obvious at the end, even if I don't use them as I've quite shown them here, because once I start to establish this tree, I will realize that some of the outlines I've done aren't in the same place, because merely because I've put some dotted outlines doesn't now mean I fill in the dots. They're there to guide me when I constantly look at the reference and look back, look at the reference and look back. And so every time I take the pencil, even for a second, off the paper, I'm looking at the reference, I'm going back to it. So at this point, I'm starting on the tree because that's the main subject and it really fills the centerpiece. But the challenge is going to be to put a lot of graphite on this, because I do want to capture all the values that we see here, but not to have it become too much a mass of mid-values, and to let it become a smudge fest, and to let it end up just being so much middle value grey, so much sort of neither light or dark grey, that it becomes hard to see, that we lose clarity with the subject, that we can't see easily enough to read what we're looking at. So I'm doing some of my darks very dark at this point, the ones that I'm confident are going to be dark. Now, at the start, when I worked out where I thought approximately at least the major tree canopy sections would be with those dotted outlines, notice that I still did my best to draw this tree. One of the problems I think that can happen when we're drawing trees is, in the end, rather than drawing the particular tree that we have in front of us, thinking that we can take the shortcut of just modifying it and just drawing a tree, because then we don't have to look nearly as much. In my experience, trees from imagination are far less interesting than the trees that we actually see. And so I am always choosing trees that I think will make good drawings, and therefore I want to capture those trees as I've seen them, as I photograph them. The one thing I will sometimes do is make slight adjustments, particularly with the light where it's coming from. I might change it to make it a little more dramatic, or just adjust it to make it a little more dramatic. Now, with these lines, what I'm doing now with the branches, and you'll notice I draw the foliage before I then do the branches that connect into them. I find this a far more accurate way to get branches that are in proportion to the edge of the canopy from the trunk. Very common fault is that the trunk and the branches are too thick for where they disappear into the final foliage, and there just isn't room for them to dissipate to the edge. So this is one way of avoiding that, starting with the foliage and then working down. It's easier to get appropriately thicker as we move the branches down than to get appropriately thinner as we move them up. Now, although we've done this dotted line for the edge of the canopy, you'll notice I didn't draw a line around the canopy because I don't feel that creates a very realistic effect, visual effect to look at. Instead, I'm using my pencil to simply hatch and create areas of value. Now, I don't want to go too dark with most of this too quickly because the way we understand values and see them really depends on the values we have around them. And so in some ways we need to make considerable adjustments to all the values once we have more of the values on the paper. It's a bit of a trap. We can't adjust the values till we have the values on the paper. So my general rule is I go lighter rather than darker, and then add darkness as I go. Now, although this is pencil, if you know my channel, you'll know that one of the issues for me when I switched from pencil to pen was to stop using an eraser because I found it was making me more perfectionistic, and that was a very unhelpful and unsatisfying habit to be developing. And I thought working directly in pen, where there was no chance of erasing any marks I put on the paper at all, would be a great way to get over that perfectionism, learn to embrace imperfections in what I draw, but also to force me into more careful observation as well. Because, well, you only get one chance to put the mark on the paper. So I'm drawing this on the assumption that I won't be able to erase any of it. In the end, I do erase one line at the end, and that was just a horizontal line I did through the center of the tree as I moved my pencil across the page and just had it too low. And so I left a graphite skid mark through the tree canopy on the left-hand side. So since it wasn't actually part of the drawing, merely a part of my lack of attention, I thought that was okay. Now, there are 4 depths of plane here that I'm working on. When we talk about depths of plane, we talk about areas that are sort of parallel to our viewing that are all approximately at a similar closeness to us. So the first one is the sandstone, the very top of a sandstone bluff, cutting really, with some trees right on the edge. And the second depth of plane is our main tree and probably that palm tree that's on the extreme right-hand side. The fourth is Sydney Harbour, which if you haven't worked out is those horizontal lines. And there is actually a small skiff on the extreme left that I tried to put in as well to give a sense of this is water. And then we've got the fourth depth of plane on the other side of Sydney Harbour. This tree actually sits above and looks down on the Sydney Opera House. It's right on the headland, the end of the Sydney Botanic Gardens, right where the gardens end, and then where the original ridge has been cut into, there's access to the Opera House. So I've had this drawing for years, maybe four years, thinking to draw it. So it was nice to finally have a go. I came across it when I was scrolling back a long way. And so I figure I've done enough of the tree for now, and now I need to work on the lower section. And I'm not real sure how to go with this. One very helpful thing to do if we're drawing from a photo and not from real life is to, if we have the image in a digital format, to desaturate it, to take out the color and to see the relative values of the different colors when the color is taken out and just their value, just their light or dark is left. It's interesting that some colors end up being surprisingly lighter or darker than other colors. And equally, some colors look very different when we see them with the color, but when the color is taken out, they actually look the same in grayscale. And that's where we often need to manipulate things so that we still have clarity when we grayscale something, such as when we draw it with lead pencil, with graphite, or with black ink. When we grayscale it, that in fact, if there is too much mid-range value, we lighten some and darken others to create clarity in what we're seeing. But then we also have to manipulate this in a way that still gives us a readable, a consistent sense of depth, because darker values generally come forward and feel closer, just as harder edges and more detail do. So when I'm doing the far side of the harbour, even the parts that are quite dark, I'm going to do them perhaps lighter than I've done the dark sections that are closer, and I'll be putting even less detail. Now, if you look at the tree canopies and just look at the silhouette edge, even though I had a series of dots, what I don't have is a joined up series of dots. I use those dots to give me a sense of where to start or end the hatching, depending which direction I was doing the lines, whether I was coming from the top down or the bottom up. And so in the end, I was drawing all of this foliage simply by establishing some lights and then working out where the dark patches are. Once or twice I got a bit confused. Early on I got a bit confused and had to make some adjustments, and towards the end I darkened too much of a part of it and lost some of my lighter values in the centre of the tree. But those sorts of things are fine because, well, it simply changes the way the tree looks, but it's still clearly a tree. So while I said we try and draw the tree that's there, because that's good practice, and as I said, I don't know many people who can improve on a tree that's real from their imagination. But equally, it is a bit of a forgiving subject, which is why it's a good subject to explore values with, because we don't have to be as precise with everything as we do with, say, architecture, where we know exactly how the box is going to look or should look. Now, you'll notice I'm holding my pencil quite some way back. I'm drawing this. This is probably half copy paper size, pretty much, without the border, just the actual graphite part. So it sits nicely in the center of just a copy paper sheet of paper. So even with that size, as you can see, I can rest my hand on the paper off the drawing, and I find that it helps me do really nice and loose hatching to hold the pencil so far back. It gives me great range to do very short strokes or longer strokes, and it lets me see the whole scene as well as I'm doing it. As I make an adjustment in this part, I can see the impact it has now on how we read other parts, or whether in fact something that was clear now looks less clear because I've darkened something and now there's not enough difference. So if I'm not going to try and erase some of that value, which I'm not doing here, then my option is to go darker somewhere else. And just now I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to make final adjustments on the tree. And at the same time as doing that, trying to work out how dark to make the other side of the harbour. Probably, I think I've gone too dark generally on the other side of the harbour. Certainly looking at the drawing in life, it's in front of me as I watch the demo, there's probably a little too much of a darker mid-value that's all the same across behind the tree and what's in the lower right section. So except for the branches, we really haven't drawn many lines at all. No lines in terms of the tree canopy, in terms of outlining, areas of foliage, but only as part of hatching to create all of the canopy that we see through hatching as value, to give us the lights and darks that we would see in the canopy. And notice too some of the negative space where I left spaces for white branches, sunlit branches in the canopy. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope this was helpful. Hope you have a go drawing it. I'll post this photo on my channel community page. So why not grab a graphite pencil and have a go? But in the end, whatever you draw, whatever you use, whatever technique you draw it with, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.